All right, guys, thank you for tuning in here today. We're back into another live stream, Ask Me Anything. And just real quick, if you're going to leave a question for me, just try to add it in the comment section below. And while I'm trying to do my best to answer that question, or at least so you know which question I'm theoretically on, you'll be able to see it posted down below. And so generally when I'm answering a question, I'll just try to have it down here so it's easy for you to see. If you say at We the Govern, it's just a little bit easier for me to pick out the question in kind of a list of questions as they tend to scroll up. And it's okay if you want to chat back and forth with everybody, but that's pretty much the only way I can actually find to be able to pick the questions out, at least so that it gives me some way of being able to distinguish questions from just banter or commentary back and forth. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful for everybody if you have any questions. Last week, our main focus, at least the discussion that we had, which was actually last Wednesday, was to discuss the primary election, which had happened the night before. And then I launched my video, I think, shortly after the live stream, just giving my rough summary of just my initial reactions to the state executive races, as well as the congressional races. Not a lot has actually probably changed from that commentary till now, even though they've added probably another about 800,000, I think, ballots they've collected and counted since then. The percentage has basically gone up from roughly 20-ish%, low 20 percentage that night to about 40% right now. In fact, I should just look real quick here so that I make sure I'm getting that number exactly right. But again, as these ballots kind of trickle in, it's the same old problem. Yeah, so we're over 40%. We're at 40.05% right now. As these late ballots kind of trickle in, this is one of the challenges that we always have in trying to figure out on election night what's actually going to happen. There were a couple things that kind of did change a little bit overall that were notable from when I did the video last week. One of on some of those races that I covered, and one of them was the analysis of the Public Lands Commissioner race. I'd kind of was surprised initially that we still had two Republicans in the top two primary process there, with all the Democrats that had jumped in the race. And I thought Up the Grove would be a little bit stronger on election night. And so it didn't surprise me that Jamie Herrera Butler was up there, but I thought Up the Grove would be a little bit stronger than he appeared. And it was interesting to see that we had two Republicans actually ahead of Up the Grove. But that only lasted for about 5 days or so. And since that time, Up the Grove is about 5,000 votes ahead of Sue Kell-Peterson, which, assuming it doesn't change, and I don't think there's enough ballots left for it to change, I would anticipate that the general election's going to have Jamie Herrera Butler versus Dave Up the Grove for Public Lands Commissioner. So that's kind of what I'm anticipating at this point in time. It was a little interesting for me in that race just to see the number of other Democrats that were still jumping in the race, since Up the Grove did get some of the key Enviro endorsements, and that surprised me that they split it up as much as they did. The Democrats, ever since 2016, have been pretty careful at these statewide executive races and any congressional races, at least for the most part, in flooding the zone with too many candidates. Now, oftentimes for politicians, the world isn't big enough to hold their ego, and so that's how you'll see multiple politicians decide to jump in and get into their, where they squeeze each other out. Republicans do that all the time, but the Democrats are usually a little bit more disciplined, and I don't see them doing that as much. So it's surprising they came as close as they did in the Public Lands Commissioner. But with that modification to, or at least update to, the changes that I had documented and talked about in my video last week, everything else pretty much stays the same. One of the things about election night is that you want to look at the first. Most people watching this, who watch a lot of these races, are generally going to be looking at election night results, and then looking at maybe the first day after that to see what the initial trend indicates with the late arriving ballots. Something interesting to note, and it was pointed out to me today, is that there's an increasingly large percentage of people who are voting that either turn their ballots directly into the state auditors or the county auditors' offices, where they have drop boxes sometimes there. You can go in and drop it off right there, or they at least turn it into the drop boxes somewhere, and they're not trusting the mail. And I believe that it's over about 60% now of the voters that do turn in their ballots, at least in this recent primary, they aren't trusting the mail to actually get their ballots there, which is probably wise, judging from all the other problems that the U.S. Postal Service has. So it's an interesting indication of, and sort of a related impact of, the failure of mail-in voting. It doesn't mean that all those people don't like mail-in voting. It just means it's interesting to see that the drop boxes are where the majority of the ballots are coming in. And the reason why we know that, at least, and I'm basing that information on what the Secretary of State posts on their own website. So that's kind of an interesting trend that's going on with this election as they're kind of collecting all these last ballots. And let me just look real quick here. So they're saying across the state, they estimate they have about 27,000 ballots to go. They're just under 2 million ballots counted. I would anticipate that they get really close to that 2 million point, puts them over 40%, which is statistically pretty typical for most. I mean, that's in the ballpark of a normal election turnout. It's a lot more than the 2016 presidential election primary results, and it's a lot less than the 2020 presidential election primary results. But it's not too. It's about what you would expect looking back at previous years on elections, presidential election cycles for the primary election turnout. I think I mentioned last week I was going to be in Friday Harbor. I was the MC for Lincoln Day Dinner, which was really just the classic kind of Republican fundraiser event. It was at a Roach Harbor, a beautiful venue. It was kind of neat, but there were about 5 Republican statewide candidates there. Reichert was there. Pete Serrano, running for the Attorney General, was there. Raul Garcia, running for a federal Senate seat, was there. Dan Matthews was there, running for lieutenant governor, and Phil Fortunato was there, running for the Insurance Commission. And so it was just interesting to get a chance so quickly after the initial primary results, just to see some of these statewide office holders at a fundraiser where they were all together and getting a chance to talk to people in the public. It's a friendly audience, and so it's not a surprise that they were well received, and I think they were able to raise some money there. But my main job was just keeping the schedule moving. If you're the MC, that's kind of your main job there, and just to fill in the gaps, make sure the dessert dash goes off, and that they essentially, if there wasn't any auction items that night, but just making sure everything kind of moves ahead. That's really the MC's role, and I do it often for a lot of groups around the state, and it was fun to be up in the San Juans anyway. So with that, I'm going to start jumping into some of these questions. I am meeting with some activists after this event tonight, so I'm going to try not to go very late on this live stream today. So if you have questions, try to get them in earlier, and let's just see where we're at and what questions that you have already. There's a bunch of them here. Good first question. I know I've left it up there on the screen for a while. Nana Ninja, why no initiatives to change our elections? Small precincts, hand count, paper ballots, night of results, and voter ID. Legal citizens. Without fair and free elections, we end up with more of the same. Absolutely true. So creating an initiative is not, even just the legal drafting of it is not actually as simple as people might imagine. It takes a little bit of time and thought process to go into it. The other thing is, before you're going to throw $1 million or $2 million into the initiative process, you're going to generally want to do surveys on the final initiative. Sometimes you can do it with prospective ballot titles. Sometimes you can, but you aren't really sure what the AG is going to give you for a ballot title. So you can just do it conceptually and see if these are positive initiatives. One of the challenges, based on Supreme Court ruling over the past 20 years pretty consistently, is that the single subject rule as it applies to initiatives is a limiting factor in whether somebody's actually able to have an initiative withstand legal challenge later on. So, for instance, the 1972 initiative that created the Open Public Meetings Act, Public Records Act, and the Public Disclosure Commission, campaign finance laws, sunshine laws generally, that would not be allowed today. That would have been an illegal initiative. And so it oftentimes, the legal review of this process to make sure this initiative is going to meet the legal standard, be popular enough to be worthwhile to get out there and put the money and effort into getting it on the ballot. Those things are significant, and they're significant barriers to entry. So one of the challenges with initiative, or I should say with an initiative that reforms elements of the voting process, is that you also have to navigate federal law, which the most significant one's the 1993 motor voter law that has an impact on, there's some things that imposes that we can't change at state level as much as you might want to. And then there's other things that are just not that popular. Now, the interesting thing is there's been a gradual change. There's been a gradual change about mail-in voting in Washington State. 7-8 years ago, I think the first time that I did or was involved with a survey on it, it was very popular, including among Republicans, and that popularity started to drop. And as I mentioned earlier in the live stream tonight, I just think the indication that people are dropping their ballots off in ballot drop boxes or handing them directly to the auditor's office kind of supports that belief that generally they're starting to become more of a trend in that direction. You actually bring up a couple things in this question here that aren't related to each other. Small precincts, you're not going to change the size of a precinct. That's very, very difficult to go through and change that. I mean, they modify them every 10 years for proportional representation within their respective counties, but as a general rule, precincts don't really change that much, and I don't think you're going to generally have an initiative that either generates enough attention or that's going to have that impact. Hand counting and paper ballots, here's the thing, people arguing for paper ballots don't seem to realize that we're already there. We actually have paper ballots. There's a lot of people that have same-day voting that don't have paper ballots. Washington State has paper ballots for everybody. It's mail-in voting. There's a paper trail. They may not be allowing us to properly look it over and audit it as they should, but that's already exists. Where we do have a problem, hugely, I think, is with fluffed up voter rolls and the fact that we can't get an election result out the same night. And you brought that up. Mail-in voting is a problem too, but I don't know that that's at the popularity level that to change it. I don't think that's there yet. So we'll just have to see where we go. I mean, there could be things that start to change it. Great question, though. I wouldn't be surprised, assuming that these initiatives this November, if they do well, and there's more enthusiasm for the initiative process moving forward, that some people are looking, and I know they already are looking at different ways, different types of initiatives that would fit all that criteria and maybe have some kind of an impact on the voter rolls. But it's more than likely going to not be an all-encompassing universal piece of legislation. It's going to be probably small pieces that gets done here and there. Frankly, if you do have a change in partisan representation at the presidential office at the federal level, my guess would be that if the Republicans are able to, if Donald Trump gets into office, my guess is you may actually see some changes from the federal level that would be impact Washington State even more dramatically than a local initiative would ever have the ability to do here. So. All right, so let's go back and see what I'm missing, because I could tell that there's a bunch of questions that passed me. There's a lot of questions popping up here. Let's see. I'll try to get this one here. Yes, I saw the latest news on Monday that Trump and Elon Musk hosted a friendly conversation. Of course, too many people logged on all at once. He said it was a denial of service attack, supposedly, too, but 1 billion people supposedly watched that. It was a pretty impressive long-form video. Then I have to tell you what's interesting. I don't know that I always relate to the long-form videos and watching them. It took me a long time to do a live stream because I didn't think anybody would really want to watch a live stream. So so I didn't spend my time watching it. There's always clips that people pull out later on. But long-form interviews are probably a good way to get to know politicians, and for those, I just don't know that you're reaching new people with that video, but it was an interesting way to utilize X, and if I was Elon Musk, I'd love to have guests like that on, because it's a pretty big deal. Let's see. There is a question here, Shaded Muse. There's a former, I'm assuming you mean former, Republican legislator who's I'm assuming who is endorsing Ferguson for governor. She represented that the area for Moncadingra represents, and who is she and why is she doing it? I don't know. I don't know who you're talking about. So you may have to actually use your name, and then maybe I can figure it out. So that I don't know, can't answer. You're talking about somebody writing in Semi Bird for governor in November because there's no difference between Reichert and Ferguson, and Reichert crapped all over the base. Well, so there's a sore loser law in Washington State, as there is in most states in America. If you lose in the primary, you're actually the only person that can't be written in for a write-in campaign. So just for clarification, it's a meaningless way of throwing away your ballot. You may throw away, in effect, the other people that you vote on your ballot as well, because when you do write-in, it does separate it out. And listen, I've done write-in campaigns before, but that's pretty much the most worthless write-in campaign anybody could come up with at this point in time. So I'm not totally sure why that's anywhere there's much value in that. And the other thing to remember is that a lot of the fighting that I saw, anyway, between Byrd and Reichert supporters, it was mostly their supporters. I didn't see the candidates themselves so much throwing that much dirt at each other any more than normal. So it is always a challenge. I've only seen this 100 times there, where you have multiple Republicans. The Democrats do the same thing, actually, but they seem to be able to get over their differences later. And there's always some faction, some group that's so upset, or it's more of a cult of personality kind of thing, where they can't accept anything, any outcome that wasn't perfect. And so then there's just a lot of infighting that kind of goes on. Now, usually that settles out, and people can decide. If you can't tell the difference between Ferguson and Reichert, you're not paying attention. Frankly, if you can't tell the difference between Ferguson and a fentanyl addict that you pulled off the street of Seattle and threw in the governor's mansion, then you're not paying attention, because the fentanyl addict would be way better than Ferguson. The fentanyl addict would just be trying to get high. He wouldn't be spending his whole time trying to harm you and I. So there is a difference. But it's shocking to me that some people can't figure that out. All right, am I following Cody Hart and his case against Ferguson? Is it true that I'm assuming you mean Ferguson, should not even be on the ballot, because Cody Hart's on the ballot, running for Congress, actually. I think that's the 2nd legislative district. And I'm aware of the claims that Cody has. I don't know how valid they are or likely to succeed. I'm not aware of it looking very legally likely that it goes anywhere. People can say a lot of things, but if there's no practical path using the flawed and ineffective and problematic legal system that we do have, if there's no practical fact that you can go through with that, then it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, and one of the things, this is something that I think the Dems bring upon themselves in a lot of ways. They've used lawfare to harass and attack their political enemies, and because they've been moderately successful at times in doing that with censorship, shadow banning, getting companies to do the dirty work for them and all that stuff, there tends to be the sense of doing the same thing back on them and expecting the same level of success, and that's not what I've seen. Usually you can't. Usually you're not going to succeed in that process. But again, I'm always game to see what people are able to achieve, and if they can start to get courts and judges to rule in their favor, that's awesome. Jack, and by the way, we're running out of time for somebody to not be on the ballot. I mean, essentially at this point in time, for instance, if a candidate made it through the primary and they drop dead tomorrow, they're still going to be on the general ballot. So there's no such thing as resigning or stepping through. You're done. I mean, yeah, your resignation date was back during filing week, and so, or the day after filing week, that Monday after. So after that, you're done, and you're committed, and you're moving. Jack, you got a question here. Could you elaborate on the most recent Fergie scandal with I think the Secretary of State or something like that? Sure, yeah, I can tell you. This is essentially, in fact, I found out about it when I was up at Friday Harbor getting ready to MC the Lincoln Day dinner up there. And that was the last minute. There was this attempt, a bunch of billionaires get together and they're opposed to these tax initiatives. All 4 of the Vote Yes, Pay Less initiatives that the Let's Go Washington people, and many of you probably watching this, have been involved in collecting signatures for and signed probably. There's going to be 4 of those initiatives on the ballot. And they're the first things. They're ahead of the president and everything else. To repeal the natural gas, or an effort to stop the natural gas ban, repeal this 2117 to repeal Inslee's carbon tax, scam tax, the initiative 2124 to repeal the payroll tax or to opt out of the payroll tax, gives people at least the option to opt out of the payroll tax for the long-term care scam that nobody's going to get, and then Initiative 2109, which is the initiative to repeal the capital gains tax, which, according to Democrat emails, clearly indicate it's their backdoor way of trying to get an income tax in eventually in Washington State. So all those are going to be on the ballot. They're all very popular. They poll very high. Vote yes, pay less. It's not a hard sell. And the billionaires are furious. And so they've been doing anything and everything they can in conjunction with SEIU, Planned Parenthood, WEA, ACLU, Nick Hanauer Civic Ventures, Fuse Washington, One America, the Democrat Party, all the Democrats. Everybody has been in a panic to try to stop these initiatives. And one of their efforts was to go in and try to challenge legally the process and authority the Secretary of State uses to validate the signatures that are looked at inside the Secretary of State's office. And so they just threw everything in the kitchen sink at it. Now, that by itself is not particularly unusual, or I wouldn't be totally surprised by that. What was surprising about it is the fact that when they brought their litigation against the Secretary of State's office, and that's the appropriate entity that you sue, the Attorney General by law has to represent, in fact, they represent all the state agencies, and their attorneys that they assign to the Secretary of State's office represent and defend the Secretary of State's office in this case. Now, the concern, of course, in this situation is that Bob Ferguson's donors, primary donors, in fact, a bunch of them, were the ones involved in the actual lawsuit at the time in Thurston County, is where it started, and to challenge the signature verification process. Now, this would be highly and exceptionally unusual to challenge it in the way and the claims they made to challenge it, because they're essentially trying to throw out the whole signature verification process from its inception, the way it's been used since the 1970s. They throw a bunch of other stuff in there that's more like just throwing mud at the wall, but really what they're trying to do is see, even though there was far more than necessary signatures with the signatures that were turned in, they're still trying to find some legal angle to get this rejected. And they lost in Thurston County. It was appealed up to the Supreme Court, and on last Friday, the Supreme Court unanimously threw it out. Now, this is what's interesting about it and where it gets sneaky with Bob Ferguson. I've done ballot title challenges before many times myself, pro se, and I'll file a ballot title challenge against Bob Ferguson 1639, the original climate change scam tax back in 1631, the one that the voters rejected. I filed a number of these in the past. It's not the only, I can't remember all of them that I've done, but I've done a number of them. Every time you do it, in order for you to be legally allowed to proceed with the process, you have to notify the sponsors of the same initiative. You can't just sue the Secretary of State or notify just the AG's office. You actually have to also notify and send notice to the sponsors of that initiative. You have to. So what's weird about this, right, is that clearly the people who are trying to sue the Secretary of State, Nick Hanauer, Bill Gates, all these super wealthy billionaires, right, that want you to pay, they just don't want to, they think it's so awesome you should pay for it, not them. They brought this in, and Bob Ferguson's defending it, and he knows very well that they should notify the sponsors of the initiative, which would be Let's Go Washington, at least. And he refuses to do so. And he does that because he's trying to keep a lid and keep it quiet. Now, he knows that they should be notified because he makes that claim in his own defense, or his attorneys make that claim in their own defense of the Secretary of State. And obviously, they prevailed. This is a good thing. The way the court case went was good. What was weird and nasty about was Bob Ferguson keeping it secret, never letting the Let's Go Washington people know. And the only reason they found out is because a journalist called him at the last minute. So that's a scandal. Bob Ferguson keeping everything secret like he usually does. God only knows the secrets that we don't know about. I mean, we're fully aware of the sex offender release program off of McNeil Island that he sponsored and helped with, the effort to destroy public records, the Oso landslide back in 2014, just a few years ago with the DSHS cases. There's lots more, right? The pay-to-play scheme with his outside legal counsels. There's just an endless fire hose of this stuff with this guy. And so I just can't even fathom what else we probably don't know about. That's just what we know of. And this was just one of the cases that came up recently. Good question. Thanks, Jack. Ben, I can see your question here. Let's see if I got it up here. In my district, the 8th does goers have a chance to beat Schreier. It's 50.2% to 45% right now. Actually, Schreier came out looking a lot weaker than I think most people realized when she ran this cycle, and it actually trended better or more against Schreier after the primary, kind of as these numbers kind of came through. Anytime you're an incumbent and you're below 50% or you're barely at 50%, that's a problem. And especially this is true because Carmen Goers, who's running for Congress as a Republican against her, and these are the two that make it to the general, really overperformed with almost no money. And so that's an interesting dynamic in that race. You couldn't say that this is a likely Republican pickup. It's just that it's much closer than probably most people realized, and there's an opportunity here. If Carmen Goers was able to probably generate a pretty aggressive campaign with a well-funded effort there, you never know what outcome could happen, particularly with the odd kind of unicorn opportunity of voter turnout this November. On one hand, there's a positive voter turnout for people who care about liberty and freedom and smaller government with the initiatives, right? People coming out to want to vote for that are more likely to be people that, presumably, if they keep voting down ticket, they'd be more likely to probably vote Republican. Not always, but there's some correlation there, theoretically. You also, though, are going to have a highly motivated leftist group in the state voting against Donald Trump, but Donald Trump's probably not, he's not going to win Washington state. And so that's going to be more of just a protest vote, so they say they got it, not because it's going to change the likely outcome of the anticipated result in a presidential primary in our state. And those are two different turnout models that are actually conflicting with each other. And I don't know, and nobody really knows, how to properly model the turnout, because a lot of people who consider themselves Democrats may be coming out to vote yes on those initiatives. A lot of apathetic people in the middle who say a pox on both houses and they hate all politicians and their vote doesn't normally count. They're going to come out probably to vote yes on those. Maybe they don't vote anything past initiatives. I don't know. But there's a lot of analysis, and nobody really has a model to look at this. There is no time in state history where you've ever had this many initiatives all at once with that big of a financial benefit potentially for the people who vote for it. So happening all at one time. It's a big deal, and I don't know how to predict that. Ben, this is another thing. I already answered that question just talking about it a little bit earlier. Let's see here. Let's see. I got the privilege to attend Random Thursday, August 8th, to watch them touch the ballots for 6 hours, Tuesday, August 24th, and went today. Oh, okay. So find the right passion. So I'm assuming you're an election observer and you went there to watch what they were doing at one of the auditor's offices or maybe King County Elections Department. I think it's good. I think it's instructive for people to go there and observe the process. I think the more people that are there looking, it does reduce bad actions and bad behaviors if you're paying attention to what's going on there. I think that's good. Let's see. Hey, Glenn, hope you're doing well. How's things going in Seattle? I don't know. Haven't been up there lately. I never been there, but worried about crime. Has the situation there been getting better or worse? Crime's pretty bad in Seattle right now. They are trying to massage the crime statistics to make it look like it's not as bad, but I did notice that Seattle moved into the top 10 cities in the country when it comes to robbery, which is not good. I mean, we were a lot lower than places like Detroit, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, places like that, San Francisco, but it's still not good, and it's worse than it's been since at least the late 90s, or late 80s anyway, that time frame, early 80s. I reported it, Find the Right Passion again, our election observer here from earlier. I reported enforcement case and it went through. F1 candidate was not reported. All incomes for Okanagan County. Good job. Thanks for paying attention. That is how you make an impact with it. And Randy, Jerry Kornfield was, I think, the first reporter that noticed the case in the Supreme Court at the last minute. That's always interesting. I wish the auditor could check proof on candidates. People get mad when others call them out. I don't know what exactly you're saying about that, but usually the auditor does need to know proof of residency, and so that's where you will find the auditor being involved in whether this is a legitimate candidate. They don't do that for congressmen, and oddly enough, judges don't have to live in the district for which they're running, but pretty much everybody else does. So the congressmen have to move to the district that they're running for if they get elected, but they don't have to live there when they run. That's not true for any of the statewide or local races, and there they do have to live there. Let's see. How do we convince non-Republicans to come over to our side? It seems impossible. Well, great point and question. Partisan affiliation, Washington State probably has one of the lowest open party affiliation sort of attitudes of any state that I'm aware of in this country. And part of it goes back to the early 1930s when we eliminated party registration by voters in our state. We haven't been registering as Republican or Democrat voters or any other party since 1934, I believe. It's 34 or 35. And so because of that, we have a very low partisan formal identification. Now, inevitably, when you create a vacuum, a party steps into the breach. There have been plenty of times since then where Republicans did control the legislature or different positions in government in Washington, and there's been, unfortunately, more times that Democrats have controlled it. How do you win people over to your side? Well, that's an individual thing, and I don't think there's some kind of miracle solution where you're able to just do something and then suddenly everybody decides to convert to you. That's not really how it works. So you find that people come over because they had a red pill moment or something happened to them, and whatever it is that opened their eyes, it shifted them over into your side. It's easy to look at people that you think should be on your side and they aren't, and you're frustrated with it. But you have to realize, I think it's just better to be aware that people come to these conclusions on their own, and nobody's going to force them to. People come to that on their own. The idea of trying to force somebody to change their ways is more of a leftist kind of attitude, and you give people things to think about, and hopefully that moves them in the right direction. Let's see. Something I've never experienced from Republicans. Okay, yeah, thanks for the comment there. And yes, I see somebody else down here making a comment about unity. Ben, this is a good, funny point. Yeah, why isn't the media covering the initiative's court case? Because it makes Bob Ferguson look bad. The Seattle Times is corrupt to its core. There's no scenario where they're ever going to report the truth. Neither will King 5 News, none of these others. I mean, if they're forced and dragged to, maybe they will, but I can't see them ever doing that. I'm sorry that that's a discovery for you, but I just think it's very funny. You got a comment here, Thunderstriker again, Kamala is too insecure about Trump. I don't know. Maybe she is. We'll see. The question is whether they both show up for the debate or find an excuse to not be there. Obviously, Trump's going to do it, but would Kamala find an excuse? I don't get the impression that she's very good at this, but remember, the thing that people oftentimes will do is they'll try to talk down the ability of their candidate enough ahead of time so that they, just showing up and surviving makes them look like they're a hero. And obviously, the media is committed to one side in this political process, and lest you don't understand, they aren't going to be supporting, under any scenario, anything on the Republican side. So they're going to always jump in and be on the other side. So they're going to always spin the news. They're going to ignore the stories. They're going to falsify the stuff. They're going to silence the people who disagree with them. That's just how it is. So that's what they'll try to do. This is another comment. Yes, well, to be fair, it wasn't. I mean, it was Democrat-leaning groups, but it was these outside organizations, mostly the Defend Washington, Nick Hanauer, Billionaire Crew, Bill Gates, the wealthy billionaire effort. They're the ones that were fighting against the initiative process. Obviously, this is aligned for the most part with elected Democrats, and the Democrat establishment, but it wasn't the Democrat Party in specific that I think was involved in that. Presley, good question here, and this is, how close do you think that the election between Reichert and Ferguson will be? Well, Ferguson showed exceptional weakness in the primary, and I don't think that can be denied. A 45% showing is poor, particularly because you're the anointed one. You're the attorney general, already elected to statewide office multiple times, and you're the one that Inslee is getting behind. You're the one that the political establishment's behind. And generally, you do a lot better than 45% in the primary. Now, Reichert got, whatever it is, 20 some odd percent, but he came out of a competitive primary where really Mullet and Byrd were both taking votes from him, and you had a plethora of other people taking little chunks of votes all along the way. And what the top two primary does is it's going to put the top two vote getters and put them into the general. Some people can take and add up votes to different people and presume that those votes are going to carry over most of the time to certain people. And that puts Reichert in the running, probably better in the running than Culp was in last cycle 4 years ago, most likely. But the main story there is really Ferguson being that weak going into this race. There are a lot of Democrats that don't like Ferguson. Now, do they dislike Ferguson enough to cross over and vote for Reichert? Who knows? How will the initiatives impact voter turnout? As I already discussed pretty extensively earlier, there's just a lot of work on this. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. All bird voters in the primary should be for record. You would presume that. There's a lot of bitterness, so it's always hard to say how individuals will vote, but on an average general projection, that's probably true. Same with Mark Mullet's voters. Remember, Mullet's votes were very clearly a vote against Ferguson, and even though he's running as a Democrat, there were a lot of Republicans that had voted for Mullet. I know this because I know a lot of them myself, and he was able to kind of capture a lot of those votes. The same thing really applies in the Public Lands Commissioner, where you had Van de Weg, Democrat Van de Weg, running for Public Lands Commissioner. But if you actually looked at his policies and how he recruited the people who voted for him, for the most part, he's a Democrat, but he recruited them using the same forest management practices and recommendations that the other two Republicans in that race had. So if they're consistent, those voters are consistent with what they actually believe as far as outcomes and public policy, in theory, those three groups the voters would mostly vote for, in this case, Jamie Hura Butler, who will be on the general election, but we'll have to see. Let's see. I'm going to just try to get to questions, guys, because there's a lot of questions popping up in here. Here's kind of a repeat of this question. Presley, great question in the sense that how close do you think the gubernatorial election will be? Do you think it'll be as close as Rossi versus Gregoire 20 years ago, or Inslee and McKenna 10 years ago? And both of those were close races. The Inslee and McKenna race was actually in 2012, and the Rossi-Gregoire race was in 2004. Both of those I remember quite well. I think Rossi won the race in 2004, but the last-minute shenanigans, when you're down to only a few hundred ballots separating you, it opens the door to people doing a lot of shady stuff. And as the later records requests that came out revealed, you had the elections department, which at the time wasn't an elected position in King County, be doing what the King County Council told them to do, and the King County Council was run by Democrats, and so they were telling them to ignore Republican vote ballots, or that were likely to be ballots, and only count ballots that were likely to be Democrats. And that's what came through in some of those emails, but those didn't come out for years, and big fights over the Public Records Act later on. Remember, that was a very narrow win, so it looked to me like Rossi really won. What you did see at the time was an incompetent clown show on the Republican side of people totally unprepared to go down this kind of a legal fight over ballot counting. And they should have been more prepared, judging from the 2000 Bush-Gore fight in Florida that had occurred just 4 years earlier. There should have been a little bit more preparation, but they weren't. And so anyway, that's how it is, and we will see. Ray Campbell, you're asking who's leading in the governor's race. You essentially have two people going into the general election. You have Bob Ferguson and you have Dave Reichert, and that's it. Those are your choices. That's how the top two primary works. Those are the top two vote getters, and it really wasn't even close after that. So we'll see. That's going to be who's there. That's funny. Here's a question. It's not really a question, but it's just so typical. What's my thoughts on Kamala refusing to do interviews with the media and Time magazine? Will the basement bunker strategy work like it did with Joe? Well, I mean, here's the thing, right? And politicians generally have to play to their skills, right? Whatever works well for them. If the candidate looks good riding a horse, they ride a horse all the time. If the candidate does a great job singing, then they sing sometimes. I mean, you're going to do whatever enhances the value of the candidate to the public, or at least what your team believes does. And it's very clear to me that Kamala is not very good on her feet, and she doesn't do a good job speaking anything except for a really heavily rehearsed and canned speech. I saw the videos, many of you have seen them too, where they essentially play the same speech that she's given in multiple different places, and it's literally just word for word. It's a teleprompter speech, right? Same laugh line, same focus for applause lines, and it's really the same speech. It's not made up on the air. Now, that's not unusual, by the way. Plenty of candidates, if you want to stay on message, you tend to come up with a defined speech that you, for the most part, probably give consistently wherever you go. And so that's not unusual. Everybody does it. As somebody who every couple years I go around to a lot of these events, I'm speaking at them, or I'm the MC, or I'm just there anyway because I'm another speaker. What happens is you hear the same politicians doing the road show, just like you are, all around the state. And I've been to these many, many times for 14 years or so. And I've heard, Dino Rossi, when he was running back in the day, gave the same speech, almost word for word everywhere. What's interesting is when they get into Q&A. That tends to be a little bit more interesting because then there's a little bit more give and take. Some politicians are good at that, some are not. She probably is terrible. So it's got to be far worse at the federal level. I have no idea what that's like, but if it's really a significant advantage, in my opinion, if you're running for public office and you understand why you're running, you're capable of speaking, you don't say dumb stuff, and you're able to interact with the public and answer questions. But that isn't everybody, and surprisingly, it's just a large percentage of people. I don't know why they don't do that, but it's one of those funny things there. Jet Fed, I'm going to bring this one up, a question, and I'm skipping down here a little bit, guys, because there's a lot of questions popping in here, and I'm worried about staying on top of this. My biggest concern these days is the voter registration process offered by the DMV, where they do not verify someone as a citizen when they offer to register them to vote. Yeah, it's one of my concerns, too. And I had somebody make a comment on my channel the other day that I didn't know what I was talking about when I was talking about non-U.S. citizens registered to vote. And I've had plenty of people come up to me from Canada, from China, New Zealand, Australia, Mexico, right? There were some people here from Nicaragua that I ran into sometime, and they showed me their ballots. I mean, I've got plenty. There's a gal from Belgium right now who got registered to vote against her will, even though she repeatedly told them not to register to vote. They register them to vote all the time. I know what the law says. I know they aren't supposed to do that. They do it anyway, and they do it pretty much consistently across the board. I've talked to plenty of people who work for the Department of Licensing that say they would get fired if they didn't register those people to vote. They do it. Now, it doesn't mean they vote. It just means that now you've got all these votes floating around out there for H-1B. These aren't even people that aren't, I'm not even talking about illegal immigrants or people that are here completely illegally. They've jumped the southern border or run up, or the Canadian border more likely now in Washington. I'm talking about people here on green cards, on people on H-1B visa holders, or expired tourist visas, or student visas, or maybe they've got a work permit to be here for a while of some kind. And they register everybody to vote, especially if you get a driver's license, which is why you'd be at DMV, or if you get any other services. They automatically register you to vote, oftentimes against your will or even knowledge. And next thing you know, you're registered to vote, and it's almost impossible to get off once you've registered to vote. And it's one of my concerns, too, about voter roll cleanup, and it's something that needs to be done. Chaz E., do you think Bob Ferguson or others will try to covertly block the initiative like they tried recently? Well, they tried, they failed. And to be fair, that wasn't Bob Ferguson doing it. It was just his donors and the billionaire kind of class that's behind the political establishment in the state. So they failed, and so the initiatives are going to be on the ballot coming up in November. Now, what'll probably happen, they've been trying all kinds of other games. They're going to try to put these statements in there that try to convince people that if you vote yes on this, you're going to, that the whole system's going to come crashing down because they won't have enough money. There'll be that kind of stuff that probably pops up. But it will be on November, and for the ones that pass, which I would anticipate most of them do, then because they're very popular when you actually talk to people, real people out there, then the question is, what happens after that? Will there be legal challenges? I think you can guarantee there's going to be legal challenges. So there's all kinds of fights that'll go on, but this is playing offense, not playing defense, so I like it. Let's see. Eric Simmons, I just heard an ad on the radio to register online to become a Washington voter with Social Security number and a digital signature, no other form of ID. Any thoughts on that? I haven't heard those ads. If you can, send them to me. At Glen at We the Governed, I'd be interested in actually hearing and seeing where the ad is and what it is. I haven't heard that. That would be a problem, I think, the way that that's being sold. But again, if the Democrat establishment believes that they can get away with that, I'm sure that they'll allow anything that's illegal like that. Hey, Glenn, why doesn't Kamala stop taxing tips right now? Yeah. Didn't her administration install 88,000 IRS agents and target tips in the first place? Yes, they did. But hypocrisy is a common feature of politics, and I wouldn't expect politicians to do anything but be dishonest. let's see. Can you believe? Here's one. That the EU threatened Elon Musk to not do an interview earlier today. Yeah, I mean, he did that yesterday. It gets scary when government's threatening you and saying that you're not allowed to interview people, you're not allowed to have that speech. It's even worse when you had a journalist that was at the White House who actually asked if the government could stop Elon Musk from interviewing Trump. I mean, I've never heard anything like this, and I hope that people out there, some level in their lizard brain cortex, they're at least somehow that they're able to get a sense that that's wrong. But people will oftentimes couch all this stuff, and it helps me politically or it doesn't. And that's unfortunate because that's what allows really, really bad ideas to go and get out there. Can an initiative be submitted to have traditional voting, voter ID, and same-day voting? The answer to that question is yes, because it was a state decision that said to go to mail-in voting. But how that's written, exactly what element of that you're dealing with, would you have to do 3 of them? You know, these are the other questions that are involved. And more importantly, would it pass if you actually got on the ballot? And that's something to think about. Kathleen, music driver, do you think, I think I pronounced that right, do you think that more non-Republicans might cross over? Don't know. And the question is, in our state, we have a ton of people who claim they're independent that probably lean Democrat. And we have a ton of people who claim they're independent that probably lean Republican. We have the lowest party affiliation of any state in America that I'm aware of. Maybe there's another state that does, but I think we've got to be right up there. What that means is very hard to truly identify who that middle category of people are. And of course, it's the group of people that theoretically all politicians, especially in general, are catering to this group of people. And will it... we'll just have to see. Then Presley, optimistic about Reichert having a good chance because of Rossi 20 years ago. We'll see. Again, there's things like that really has more to do with voter turnout and who shows up and a number of other factors, and I wouldn't want it to come down to the wire. So you want to be fairly obvious. Here's a question from Thunderstriker, 2 questions. How does Reichert's name recognition, past political experience, play a role in his chances against his opponents? Well, they play pretty well in theory in the King County area or within the 8th Congressional District where he was a congressman, or at least just the name recognition that comes from that. So that, in theory, is a reasonable foundation for somebody running for office. Will it be enough to overcome an current incumbent Democrat who's got the media in his back pocket and a handful of billionaires supporting him in every way they can? That's the bigger question there. So I don't know that I have an answer to that exactly, but Ferguson clearly showed that he wasn't that strong with his 45% in the primary, and that's pretty stunning, to be honest with you. So we'll see what happens out there. What strategies can Reichert employ to mobilize Republican voters and attract independents in our state? Well, essentially, one of the things you don't do is you don't water down your message. You got to give people a reason to vote for you, and reason to vote for you isn't that I'm going to be just like the other guy, only a little bit worse, a little bit less worse than they are. You really do have to clearly distinguish the differences between you, and more importantly, you need to go out and say, here are the things I'm going to provide, do for you or make life better for you in Washington State. Lower taxes, lower regulation, smaller government, less abusive outcomes, focusing on public safety, things like that. Now, Ferguson's done the surveys that shows that people believe that he's weak and ineffective and dishonest when it comes to public safety, which is why you see Ferguson running a whole campaign pretending like he suddenly discovered law and order yesterday. The guy's had a history, Ferguson specifically, of making our state the least safe state he could possibly get there. He ignored all crime everywhere as long as he could, except unless you were a flower shop in Tri-Cities and you had religious beliefs that he didn't agree with, then he would sue you to the end of time. Or if you're an initiative guy like Tim Eyman, then he would sue you to the end of time. Or if you were Trump on the ballot and didn't like you, he would sue you a bunch. So that's who Ferguson focused on. He didn't care about people dying in the streets, crime on the rise, any corruption issues. He ignores all that. Now suddenly he's going out and telling people, I don't know why anybody believes him, but he's telling people that he cares about having more law enforcement in the streets. There's nothing that he's done. It's just crazy. Let's see. And again, yes, it's always a question there, as Presley mentions, of getting enough people to get in. Let's see. Bob Ferguson is a Class C felon. Maybe he might actually be more of a felon than that. But again, you're going to have to get judges to agree with that, and we're running out of time. I know the Cody Hart effort that he's got there, and some other legal efforts as well. I don't put a lot of faith in Hail Mary opportunities like that, but the stories that are out there should be out there and make a big deal. Make a big impact, I should say, trying to get them out to other people. Sorry, not sorry. My driver's license address is in a different county than I live. I receive ballots for both counties. Why can't they catch this and prevent sending somebody 2 ballots? They love flooding the zone with ballots, especially in King County. There's an egregious level of incompetence that's associated with the entire process for how they register people to vote. And the fact that they don't remove anybody to vote, even when you've provided national change of address update system through the U.S. Postal Service, even when you're dead through the Social Security Administrative Death List, when I've compared that. The problem with each of these lists, and anytime you dig into this, and actually, is that it's not a crystal clear cut thing where they always screw this up. It's like they often screw it up. They don't always. And so you really digging into it, it's very labor intensive. None of the auditors or the Secretary of State want you to look at it. They threaten you like they threatened me many times. For the last 4 years, I've been threatened more often than anything else I've ever done with the voter roll cleanup effort that I've had. They've repeatedly threatened me all the time. They threaten, because it's the one thing they certainly don't want you to look at. So anyway, let's see. TZ Burton, this I haven't seen. So you're bringing up a question that I can't answer because I don't know enough about it. But this is the question about the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that Bob Ferguson did damage to the Union Gospel Mission and violating their free speech due to a law passed about hiring. Epic Times today. Love to look at it. When I do, I'll comment on it. Right now, I don't know. Certainly sounds like Bob Ferguson. So let's see. What do you think Dave Reichert's best strategy? Get enough crossover Democrat voters and independents to win? I think I just answered this one recently. But again, reaching out to people and convincing them that that they need to make a difference if they want things to change. If they like riots and sex predators in their neighborhood and a collapsing public safety and increasing taxes and all that, then I don't think then Ferguson's your guy, right? Another question here from Thunder Striker. What's wrong with people causing chaos in Ferguson, and why are many hesitant to pursue a career in law enforcement despite the sacrifice of those who put their lives on the line? Well, obviously what's happening is if you disrespect a specific career path and then you attack and hurt the people in that career path, it's going to reduce the likelihood that people want to be in that career path. And that's what's happening in law enforcement, not just in Ferguson, but in Seattle, for example. How am I doing today? Great. Thanks for asking. If COVID comes back, will Dave Reichert, if elected, would he keep businesses open? I would hope so. Good question to ask him. That is a good question, actually. I've never heard anybody ask him that question, but that's one that I would definitely ask. Michelle Andrees, does anyone assure the tribal vote is bona fide since they do not even need a tribal ID so homeless can vote? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Nobody determines anything about what happens on elections on reservations, which is a problem. Theoretically, the Bureau of Indian Affairs is kind of the federal supervisory sort of entity that manages what happens on reservations. Now we have elections, and the Secretary of State is supposed to be in charge of that. The problem that we've seen is we saw the Lummi tribe helpfully videotape themselves committing vote fraud and violating the law a couple years ago, and it's always better if they videotape it for the world to see if you're going to try to bring it up as an issue. You sign it, you give it to the FBI, and nobody does anything. I'm sure they've investigated it, but it's been 4 years, and these guys documented their own violations very clearly and openly for the world to see. What they were doing is bribing people to vote. That is illegal. It's been illegal, actually, for a long, long time. 150 years, I believe. Anyway, they did take that. They took the video down later, and of course they were bribing people to vote for Democrats. I don't know how much people are watching it. One of the challenges with tribal voting is that there's been a lot of tribes have factions within their reservation, or at least within their group, and they're fighting each other nonstop for dominance and control of the per cap rules or whatever it is that they're arguing about. And so one of the worst things that happens in tribes when you see these fights is when they kick people out saying that they are no longer tribal members. That's when you really see some of the worst stuff. And it's a big question to me about whether anybody's watching this or doing a good job. Let's see. I'm trying to get down to some of these questions, guys. Let me look for questions. Gregorius Greg, what are some of the things that we can do to help candidates and initiatives between now and Election Day? What are the options? Well, the most obvious thing is to try to spread the word for whoever it is you support. And I would look at the primary results, try to find and adopt a politician locally, and the initiatives just kind of go along with that. But support those initiatives and let everybody know, vote yes, pay less, especially people who are less inclined to vote because they're lazy or they don't think it matters. Get them out there at least to fill that portion of the ballot out. Maybe if they have an extra couple minutes in their life, that they can go through and fill out the rest and put it in the hopper. I do not think that elections are perfect. I don't think that I think there's a lot of problems with it. I know that better than most. I've been fighting on this issue for a long time, long before it was cool. And I'm going to tell you that there's some real problems out there. But that doesn't mean that you surrender and just let the other side roll over you, which is what I see people do when they say they aren't going to vote at all. It's pointless. So it helps us, those of us who are actually willing to fight, even if you aren't, that at least you help us in some minimal, pathetic, minor way. And voting is the barest minimum thing you could possibly do. So the other thing I would pay a lot of attention to is I would get into the vote harvesting process. It's legal in our state, whether or not it should be, it is. So get all those ballots in. When you fill out your ballots, get those in quick. Go out and collect other people's ballots as they fill them out and make sure those get delivered in the drop boxes or preferably directly to the auditor's office where you live. I think that just helps get things going. Derek Pletcher, will Dave Reichert help stop? Well, Black Lives Matter rioting and looting in Seattle, I think it doesn't matter who's rioting and looting. And to be fair, this is actually something he has a personal direct history on. He was the one that organized the response to the WTO riots in Seattle in 2000. He was actually the sheriff and commanding the 300 some odd people that he staged in the city against the mayor's wishes so that they could respond quickly to stop the large rioting that was occurring back then. And those were much larger riots than what you saw later on with BLM or with the stupid Chaz Chop thing up in Seattle. So to be fair on that one, I think you can actually look and say he's already done that. I don't know why he wouldn't do it again. So we'll have to see. Corey, how can we get more than 30% turnout for an election? Well, we're at 40%, just so you know, right now. So that's the update today. But where are all the Republicans? We need to find them and encourage them to vote. Sure, just independents that are lean that way. And a lot of people, summer primaries are always a problem because turnout is oftentimes affected by the fact that people are on vacation. They forgot there was an election. I mean, there's a lot of things that do happen out there. They drank too much. I don't know. It's just there's all kinds of stuff going on right this time of year. And especially in a presidential election, the hype and the drama tends to come focus in November. It does consolidate then. You will get a lot higher voter turnout in the state, probably twice what we saw in the primary, roughly. So I would never presume that there's a red wave coming. I see some people saying that in here. I don't think I would ever presume that. But it is worth going and working hard so you can focus on some of the races that you would like to win and adopt a candidate in a campaign locally and go help them. And even just going door to door, making sure people know about that person is good. I mean, print something off on the website and let people know. I mean, just anything to get the word out. PJ Finster, is there a website to easily see the results from Washington State's primary, is what I'm assuming you're asking. If you're in Washington State, it's the Secretary of State office. You can say Washington State, Secretary of State, 2024 elections. You'll go right there. You can click on it. And they break it down into federal races, which are the congressional and the Senate seat for our state executive level races, which are all the statewide office holders, and then legislative races, and then local races. So you can go there and look, and it's pretty well broken down. It's usually pretty self-explanatory once I show people how to use it. Okay, Washington will never be red, purple at best. Yeah, you can, I'll say that. Pop that one up there. Sure, that's always, it just depends on the moods and swings of time and what's happening and how people shift. Washington State's typically been very anti-tax and anti-regulation. Historically, regardless of whatever party affiliation they had over the years, that has been actually a common characteristic of Washingtonians. Usually we don't like government screwing us over and telling us what to do. That might make us quite a bit different than Californians or New Yorkers, I don't know, but that is something that's been a characteristic in Washington State. The initiatives have proven that time and time again. There's a decent chunk of Democrats that'll vote for a clown into office who imposes stupid taxes on them. At the very same time, they'll turn right around and vote out that tax. So I don't know how to explain that, but that's how it is. It doesn't mean it has to make sense, but we'll see how it goes. Let's see. How will Harris respond to Ferguson? I don't know. I mean, this is the thing. Here's the whole question about president candidate Harris. I am positive that she will do nothing to stop riots. I'm sure she'll allow rioters to get, certainly won't treat them as aggressively as she's enjoyed cheering on putting J6 protesters into prison for life. But I would anticipate that she does nothing about it because that's her left-wing base and she needs them. There is a question here about T.Z. Burton. What do you think about Musk and Rumble's lawsuit against GARM, monopoly on advertising dollars? I think it's a good one. I was actually fairly unaware of the issues behind that lawsuit as they filed it, so I'm curious to see about how it's going. Corey, how many of the voters watching right now? I think that the Joe Biden-Inslee economy is good for their families. I don't know if you mean watching this show, probably very few. How many of them watching the overall election? Yeah, it's still roughly half the country somehow think it's okay. Let's see. Find the right passion. You won't mind if I clip my part? Thank you. Sure. If you want to clip your part of the video, go ahead and you can do that. Nobody's stopping you. If you ever, okay, this is funny. If you ever run for office, Glenn, you should do the Putin and have pictures of you with your shirt riding a horse. Yeah. Okay. I've never understood that the politicians want to do stuff like that, but they do. And obviously it depends on which country you're in and some of those interesting issues related to that. How can political leaders, this is just a question I've seen you ask a few times before, Thunder Striker, but effectively address concerns of marginalized communities while balancing the interests of their broader constituencies. You know, the best thing you can do is just get government out of people's lives. If you want to have a community that doesn't have as much divisions in it, most of the time, just get government out of it, and government creates most of the problems that they're there to supposedly fix. So if you get them out of the way, 9 times out of 10, there's an equilibrium that tends to develop, and people can relate to each other as a community and as a unified community far less than if they're divided based on some kind of a crazy, public policy disaster zone or tax. Lori Lane, agree with you, Glenn, about this initiative. Surprise. Sure glad the state Supreme dismissed both cases. And let's go, Washington deserves our kudos, and they do. And I mean, there's no way for us to actually completely project exactly what's going to happen in Washington State because the initiatives are going to change the turnout model here. Do you think every Republican needs to show up in November, or will it just lead to more of the same mismanagement in the state? Well, we don't have enough Republicans in Washington State, so even if they all turn up, I'm a little worried it's not enough. But of course, and more importantly, independents in our state. Ken, you got a question here. Is liberty on the rise in our state, and how many libertarians are there in our state? Judging from the election results I've seen, we're about 5% libertarian, give or take, at the best. Usually we're not that high. There's obviously a libertarian wing of the Republican Party. I probably consider myself in that oftentimes, not in every way, but in some ways. There is a strain of libertarianism that's existed in America for a long time. It's always been there. It manifests itself in different ways in the political process. Washington State's oftentimes been considered a hotbed of libertarianism. But again, when you have socialistic kind of Democrat policies that destroy and attack individuals, it reduces that a little bit. Squat code, why is Reichert so far behind Ferguson? Why don't Republicans support Dave or run better candidates for statewide or federal office like Senate? The way the top 2 primary works, everybody gets to jump into the scrum of the primary and the top 2 vote getters move on. That's how it works. And so typically and frequently, the party affiliation divides up the people in the primary process. So in this particular recent case, You had 28 people running for governor. You had one of them that was dumped a ton of money into the campaign, which was Ferguson, and tried to unify the Democrats. He failed to do so, but he got up to 45% of the vote. Reichert is running as a Republican. Byrd was running as a Republican. And Mullet was running as a rogue Democrat who was really an anti-Republican vote. When you add the three votes together, they're much closer to Ferguson. But they aren't alone. There's several other people there that were running and that people voted for that arguably are anti-establishment or anti-status quo. Some of those people would probably shift over and vote for Reichert in the general election. There's no sane person that could possibly vote for Ferguson and think they're voting for anything other than the worst possible outcome you could possibly get in public office. But we'll see. Again, it really depends on other things. And Ben, your question here about how likely you think it is that Reichert wins, do you have a percentage? It's always going to be viewed as a long shot because you're outspent by the other side. Now, Reichert's doing a better job on fundraising. He's starting to move up there a little bit. Money matters because that's how you market yourself. He will have to spend his money better than, you can't just give it all to consultants. They're incompetent clowns at best, and they're going to waste your money. Direct voter contact is really your only good option. Advertising, promotion, you have to get out and do that stuff as much as you can. So it's crazy. Let's see. There's a great one here. Jason, I think I might have skipped over one of your questions here. I'm not trying. There's just a lot coming up, and I'm trying to hit them here. But the Washington Gun Law YouTube channel, I'm a big fan. Kirk's videos are great. Does a good job covering everything gun-related. After watching a bunch of them, I hesitate to even try to cover the same topics because I think he does a much better job than I do on those issues. So that's what I'm thinking. By the way, going back, there was a question here about Ben. I'm glad you have optimism 50-50. It's probably lower percentage than that, but at the same time, if you don't show up, you don't try, you don't work, you don't get there. And so we got a reasonable chance of making something happen. We'll just have to see. TZ Burton, Glenn, Brandy Cruz, Jason Rance, Andy No. News for reasonable people. Great Seattle area news. Love it. Thank you so much for putting me in with all those folk. We may not all disagree sometimes, but at least we are trying to continue to grow. TZ Burton, yep. This is, live streams are never going to get the same kind of viewership as my videos that I put out, but it's always appreciated the more people that are watching. And if you like what I'm doing, I'm just going to keep doing it. Or if you want me to do something different, please let me know. No guarantees I'm going to do what you want me to do, but at least let me know if you think I'm doing anything wrong. This is funny. Bob Ferguson being recognized for fighting his price fixing and winning that lawsuit for the people of Washington. That's just Bob Ferguson promoting himself for a shakedown operation they did against the tuna chicken check people. He needed cash to send out to voters so that he could bribe them to vote for him. And this is his way of self-promotion during a political campaign. It's very questionable, and it's kind of crazy, but that's what's going on. Bob Ferguson absolutely wanted to defund the police. He certainly didn't want to refund them. He's suddenly discovered that recently, but it's not. Nobody really believes it. Any recommended candidates to vote for in Snohomish County elections? They all seem pretty nutty. You have to be a little more specific. Snohomish County is a big county. There's a lot of people running for office up there. The charter counties in particular, meaning King, Snohomish, Pierce, Whatcom, it's San Juan, Clallam, and Clark. These are all the charter counties, and so they're going to have more people up for office this kind of year. Let's see. Ben Garrett, can Ferguson get in trouble for not disclosing the lawsuit to Let's Go Washington, not recusing himself because there was a conflict of interest? Yeah, it's possible, but by the time he does, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's not that it doesn't hurt to try to go after him for it, but it's not going to make a big impact right now. Let's see. I'm going to see if I can get a couple more questions before I'm going to have to get up to this next meeting here. Yeah, I know that Bob Ferguson called himself a change agent for a governor's seat. That terrifies me. I don't know what he means. Change, it could be terrible. So, Jason, could you get Todd Herman's soundboard with the quotes from Bob? The law matters, and Inslee, that's a brain-dead policy. That's a good idea. I should do that. let's see, in the $30 car tab fee that we the people approved, who was the one that filed the lawsuit in court that eventually overturned it? It was actually a consortium, if I remember right, of local governments mostly. There was some nonprofit group and a couple of individuals, but mostly it was local governments that wanted to hold on to your cash because a lot of the voter tab cash is held locally. Actually, that's what they end up doing with it. So of course they wanted it. Let's see, Dan, looking at my county stats, Yakima, the overvote, undervote surprises me. What do I believe drives this? That's a good question. I haven't looked at Yakima. I do look at that usually later in the process when they finally certify the elections. And it's pretty unusual. It's interesting. So you'll see in undervotes because somebody over here is very popular, and then the next couple people nobody knows who they are, so they just undervote them. Or if there's only one person on the ballot, there's oftentimes substantial undervotes. It is worth looking at that and coming up with metrics for what those undervotes are and understanding why they happen. And so for people who are really wonkish and into this, that actually is a useful thing of time. This is funny here. Lost Bird, Edward R. Durr, truck driver, only raised about 2,000, unseated a long-term Dem. Yes, he did. The reason why everyone on the planet knows that story is because it's so rare. You don't see the 10,000 stories of the other people that didn't raise that much money and they failed in their effort. It's just an unusual one, and that's why it stands out. So anyway, it's interesting. So. This is Presley. I looked into base scenarios close to 2012, like 2% loss. It lists a lot closer than then. I don't know what actually. The typos are too much for me to understand exactly what you're saying there, but I'm assuming you went back and looked at 2012 and you're comparing those numbers. I'm going to do the same, but I haven't done that yet. Let's see. How long does a person have to live in Washington State to vote? My niece is getting married a week from her 18th birthday, and I'm assuming she will vote. Here's the thing. You have to live here. It's supposed to be 30 days. But now, with that recent sue and settle case that was orchestrated in our state, it's nebulous. It's a question. You may only have to live here one day. So it's ridiculous. I think it's anti-constitutional, but it is a problem. So I'm not sure that they're going to enforce that very aggressively one way or the other. Okay, with that, guys, I got to go. I'm going to be meeting with these other activists, and I do not want to be any later than I already will be. Thank you guys so much for logging in and joining me for the live stream. Feel free to share this to other people. Let me know in the comments section below if you're watching this after it was live, what you think I missed, or if I screwed up and missed anything, because sometimes I do, and I appreciate that feedback, and we'll try to see you next week. I am not sure. I'm actually dropping a kid off at college next week, so I'm not totally positive about what day I'm going to be doing my next live stream next week. So we'll have to see and play that by ear. I did film 3 videos today, of which I hope to roll them out this week and cut over the weekend, and hopefully you'll like those. Interested in your feedback on that, and hopefully it's beneficial. Again, thank you everybody for watching, and I anticipate the rest of this year to be pretty crazy for the most part. But I'm still dealing with some late summer stuff, and I just don't know next week what day I can do a live stream. So if I do it, it's going to be probably Wednesday. I don't think I can do it Tuesday, but we'll see how it goes. Hopefully, otherwise I have to do it on the road, and I'm not sure how well that'll work out. So hope all's well. We'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll